It was a lot noisier in here a minute ago. Welcome everyone to tonight's school committee meeting. We're going to get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I have some noisy second graders here. Could you guys help us with the Pledge of Allegiance, please? All right, let's go.
To start. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you guys. All right, we got just a couple quick things to do and then we're going to get right to you guys. All right, we have a consent agenda, the minutes from January 25th, 2018, and oath to bills and payroll.
Make a motion that consent agenda is read.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. We have two sections in the meeting for input from interested citizens, one at the beginning and one at the end. This is the first one. Are there any citizens here who wish to bring any business before the school committee? All right, seeing none. We'll start with Olivia with the student representative report.
I'll go quick because, frankly, I think what the second graders have to say is more interesting than what I have tonight. At Shaker Lane, although the Patriots did not win the Super Bowl, which not only affected the Shaker Lane students, it was a devastating day at the high school. Shaker Lane did have a successful Super Bowl, and they collected 630 cans, which will be donated to Loaves and Fishes. Winterfest was a huge success, and Ms. Kane would like to thank all the families and PTA involved. Russell Street and Shaker Lane had Global Play Day on Wednesday, which again I think is so cool. Would love it if it got instituted at the high school, but you never know. The middle school has the spelling bee on the 16th. At the high school, 19 seniors, including myself, are waking up very early tomorrow to head out to DC to attend the Lumpkin Summit, which is being hosted at American University. The townwide band concert is on the 13th, and it has a rain date of the 15th, which should be pretty spectacular. And everyone is looking forward to February break.
Great, thank you, Olivia. All right, do we have any other recognition?
I think we can move right into presentation.
Excellent. We have several presentations from students. We're going to kick off with Shaker Lane second graders.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our second graders who will come up in a few minutes and talk to you about their STEAM Day. Our STEAM Day was last Wednesday, and they're going to represent our second graders. First, I want to introduce second grade teachers Amy McGrath and Margie Packer. They will say a few words about STEAM Day.
Good evening. The second grade students took place in a fun engineering design challenge on January 31st. The students used the elements of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math to construct, solve a problem. The challenge was designed by the second grade team to promote both innovative and deductive thinking. As our students will describe to you, they worked collaboratively in their planning, designing, and construction of their models. Their goal, as they will describe to you, was to create a raft and challenge to get shaky across a lake.
They're just going to get into their positions. They've been practicing the past few days for this. All right, here is our second grade representatives.
We're here to tell you what about our STEAM Day and what STEAM stands for. Hi, my name is Rosemary Taylor. S stands for science. My name is Sri Charan Pokori.
My name is Clay Blaine.
T is for technology.
My name is Sarah Pudans, and E is for engineering.
I'm Cassidy Forsberg.
I'm Bella Alsop.
A is for art.
I'm Elsie Miller, and M stands for math.
The raft challenge. The challenge was to keep Shaky on a raft for 20 seconds and keep him in the wavy lake upright for 20 seconds. These are the only materials that you could use to build your raft. Shaky, white craft sticks, masking tape, tin foil, string, rubber bands. Packing peanuts, large straws, styrofoam cups, corks, scissors, pencils. We cannot put the scissors or pencils in our raft, only to draw and cut. Design. We had to design what our raft was going to look like and label where our materials were going to go. We had to write the materials we were going to use on the back of the design, and before we could build our raft, we had to get the raft approved. We had to create the raft to make the raft float, and we have to use the materials to make the raft that we need to keep shaking up.
Then we had to put our raft in the lake. And Shaky would go in the raft, and the teacher would shake it like a wavy ocean. And Shaky needed to stay upright, not sink, and not get wet for 20 seconds.
Redesign. Top left corner. We had to redesign our raft because it worked with the little Shaky but not the big Shaky. When we tried to put the big Shaky in, he started to float, but then it fell down in the water. So we had to redesign our boat.
Our second boat, we added 3 more corks to it. Then we taped it and wrapped it in tin foil. Then we taped it onto the other boat. We cut a triangle into the into the cup. Then into 2 cups. So there were triangles on both cups. Then we put them together. And while Bella was doing that, me and Romy made a sign for it. And then it did not, it was able to hold little Shaky, I think, but not big Shaky, because it just tipped right over like the first one.
On the bottom left, you can see our third redesign, and we put 3 craft sticks and stacked them onto each other, and we did that on the other side, and we taped it around, and then we put 1 cork in each corner, and we put 1 stick in the front and the back, and we gave Shaky a life jacket, and there was 4 straws on the bottom, and we wrapped tin foil around it, and it was successful. On the top right corner, this was our first raft, and we put tin foil on the very bottom, which we kept for the whole time, and craft sticks, 2 layers of craft sticks, and on top of the tin foil.
And we put straws on the walls, and we put a styrofoam cup in the middle. Then it didn't work because Shaky couldn't fit in the cup. So we had to cut the cup so he could fit through and add 2 more straws so he wouldn't get wet. And he stood up for 20 seconds but got wet.
On the bottom right, we took our raft and we wrapped it in tin foil so that we would clog up all the holes that the straws were giving. We took pictures along the way.
So they are certainly open for questions. If anyone has any questions about their designs, their redesigns, or their process.
Okay. Any other questions?
It's really great to see what you guys did and see it in a presentation. I got to see them in person last week, so that was really cool, and I'm glad you guys all had successful rafts in the end. So good work.
Oh, I'm sad, very.
Well, thank you for having them.
All right, thank you
You did a
guys.
great job.
Could they show you the rafts real quick? They did bring a couple of models.
This was our raft. With shaky inside.
You
Yeah.
guys want to kind of do a little parade up and around this way so we can all see your rafts? You can go either way, whichever one you want.
If Shaky doesn't bite, I won't bite either.
Nice.
Nice. Which shaky was your favorite, the big shaky or the little shaky? The little shaky.
Romy had to make a bigger life jacket for the big shaky.
Good job, guys. That's impressive. Look at that. Awesome. Show those guys.
How'd you keep her from falling over?
It's nice and flat.
That's nice. Good job.
Very nice. Good job, guys.
They could continue to talk all day.
That's awesome. Right. Good
All right, thanks, guys. All right, now we have a second presentation of the high school Spanish 3 class who went to Shaker Lane. If you guys are half as impressive, it'll still be okay. Oh, you don't have to leave. Okay.
So that was a really tough act to follow, so we'll see how we do. My name is Elizabeth Steele. I'm a Spanish teacher at the high school. First of all, thank you for letting us come and tell you about our project in collaboration that my Spanish 3 honors classes did with Mrs. Sawasik's first grade class at Shaker Lane. So I have some of my students here to tell you about the project and the experience.
Hi, my name is Christina Petrov, and I'm a 10th grader. And this year, instead of taking a mid-year exam, we created children's books. So each class, we were all split into pairs, and each group made a children's book between 10 to 20 pages in Spanish, which we then took to Shaker Lane and read to Mrs. Sawasik's first graders. So we had a few requirements for writing our books, and one of the requirements was to have a title page, and that is a title page that me and my partner made. The next requirement was to have a conflict within the plot that developed throughout the book. The conflict in my plot was that the little fox Zoe wanted a dog for her birthday because she hated school, and the only thing that would make that better was a puppy for her birthday. At the end of the book, she finally got her puppy and named him Bean. And those are the first 2 pages of our book. Another requirement that we had was to have a glossary. We used that glossary when we were reading to the first graders to let them understand what was happening in the story.
All of our books had similar themes to any average children's book. This one, for example, was about a kitten who lived on a farm and traveled out into the woods to find more friends and got stuck in a fire and got saved by an eagle. They all contained glossaries so we could teach simple Spanish to the kids throughout the book.
So here are a couple of pages from our book. We wrote about a zoo in Florida, and they were going out of business, so they had to get the funds to keep it going. And they went out and they did a bunch of activities, and they had a bunch of kids come, and they were able to save the zoo.
So these are a couple of pictures of us reading to the first graders, and each group of high school students had had a couple groups of first graders that they read to. See, there's some more pictures, and they're all pretty entertained, which is pretty cool to see. And then this is a video of me and my partner reading to two of the first grade boys, so if we could play.
Hear the audio.
Yeah?
Yes,
Yeah.
can?
Well, so that's okay. If you could see the video, they're very entertained, and their smiles are just really cool to see, and you can tell that me and my partner had a fun time doing it too. So that was pretty cool. So,
I'm gonna try one more time. The video's not coming out, I'm sorry.
no problem.
Okay, process fantastico.
Well, we read in the library of Shaker Lane, and we sat on the rug, we sat near the tables, and I really liked this project because it was in place of our midterm, and this did take just as much work as a midterm, like studying and working for that would, so great alternatives.
I'm Brandon, as well, a 10th grader, and actually it's one slide back is another video. Hopefully this one plays. Well, anyway, so me and my partner read to two first grade girls, and they were very fascinated actually in Spanish, and we had a little extra time towards the end, and that they were so fascinated that they actually wanted to start writing a new book. So they would tell me what they wanted to say in English, and then I would translate it to Spanish, or my partner and I would translate it to Spanish. And we may have not only got a couple pages, but they had a fun time writing their own book. And then El Fin, which is the end. And we want to thank Miss Ham for driving us to Shaker Lane, Miss Kane, the principal, for having us, and Miss Wasik and her awesome first grader students listening to us reading their book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't run away, we might have questions. Does anybody have questions? I have a question. So, was it harder to come up with the story and the plot in translating it actually into Spanish? And did any of you guys realize the plot you undertook was too complex to get into Spanish and gear it down? Or was it because it was based on a kid's story, was it manageable?
So the plot of my book, which is actually the one that was being passed around, was a bit difficult for us to translate. We had an overall plot, but coming up with the individual pages and sort of interconnecting it took a lot of work, and some of the words that we needed we hadn't already learned in class. So it did take quite a while over the course of like 2 months of constant translating, correcting what we wrote, but it was a lot of fun overall.
I assume, Ms. Steele, that was part of the idea of the was to get them to expand the vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, awesome.
Learn a few new words and have to work them up themselves.
Good. Are any of you guys trying to option this to Hollywood or get an agent or anything like that? It
Some
looks
of
pretty
them
good.
with the drawings.
Yeah.
Very,
drawings
very
are
impressive.
Very impressive,
Yes,
yes.
they are.
What a great idea. I hope you do it again.
Thank you.
It is a great project.
That says it all right there. I want to thank Mrs. Steele, too, for putting this together. This is an example of the authentic learning we talk so often about, self-directed learning. The students were highly engaged and motivated. We want to see more of this in place of the classic mid-year exam with multiple choice questions and a couple of short answers and maybe an essay that we see so often. This is real learning and the application of it to students. And there was a benefit, too, to other people, to younger people, so they pass their learning on. All those great things that we see in learning, and we saw it in Littleton High School in this exam experience, or in place of an exam experience.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome to stay, too. But you won't.
Sorry about the video, guys.
All right, are we going to talk about the DC trip?
Hello. Truth be told, some students from 9th grade were supposed to be here tonight, and I don't see them. I apologize. What they were going to do is tell you about their experiences last year in Washington, D.C. I don't know if they're confused about the date, so I'll just go
Well,
ahead.
if they are,
and
we
let
can
you know.
certainly bring them back
Okay.
for that part of it, because we would like to hear it. I mean,
Sure.
we're going to talk about this year's trip, which is great.
Right.
You guys got to get through your planning, but
Right.
let's not miss the opportunity to bring them back. It's not a
Right.
problem.
So I am asking permission for this current 8th grade class to travel to Washington, D.C. The dates for this year's trip are May 21st through the 24th. Just to list a few places where they travel, it's a very busy trip. They go to the U.S. Capitol, the Library of Congress, the Holocaust Museum, the Tomb of the Unknowns at Arlington National Cemetery, Lincoln and Jefferson Memorials, and the Smithsonian, just to name a few of the places while they are in Washington. And what was new to the trip last year was that they stopped in Gettysburg on the way home. It was a very successful trip last year, and the students really spent the remainder of the year raving about their experience. I do think they have lifelong experiences that stay with them in all of the places that they visit. So I'm asking permission for the 8th grade class to travel to that on that trip to Washington again this year, May 21st to 24th.
All right. Because this is an out-of-state trip, it does require a approval by the school committee.
Excuse me. Can I ask just one question?
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of, I think you noted it here in your last paragraph, seems to be a significantly larger number this year that will require some help to do it. How far along in the fundraising are you?
We've almost completed the fundraising for the initial request that we have right now. It's a group of people who got together to volunteer to do that. So we have another event coming up, a proposal for another event coming up in March, but they have been fundraising since last year.
And then make a motion to approve the DC field trip from 21 to 24 May 2018.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Great.
Thank you so much.
Please pass our appreciation on to the people who fundraised for these
Absolutely.
students. And that's a significant amount of money to raise for a trip, so very appreciative of their efforts.
Absolutely, I agree, and I will. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. We have another field trip coming.
Trip.
Good evening, everyone. So I am Hillary Bridge, and I'm here on behalf of the band, the high school band, asking permission for us to take our trip to Orlando, Florida, to visit Disney World. We've done this 2 other times. We went in 2013 and in 2016. So the trip offers us the opportunity to perform in Disney World, so the students actually get to play for an audience that might not know who they are. So it's always been traditionally a little bit of a interesting experience for the students. Typically when we perform here, they know who's going to be in the audience. So it's a different experience to perform for people who have no idea who they are. And additionally, while we're there, we also participate in a workshop with Disney professionals. And during the workshop, the students learn a lot about different careers in the arts field and in the professional arts field specifically. We also get the experience of performing music directly from a Disney score. Some of them are handwritten, which is really neat. And while they're performing, they're learning the process of scoring a film. So we're watching films, they learn about click tracks. We have sound engineers right there recording live what we're doing, mixing it, playing it back. It's a neat experience for the students. And of course, there's plenty of time to have fun in Disney World as well. So I've given you the information. The cost is projected to be $1,757 per student. We currently have about $10,000 raised for students who might need any sort of financial help. We also project to raise another $3,000 at our mattress sale, which we've earned anywhere from 2 to 5. So I felt like $3,000 was a pretty good estimate. So we'll be able to have some more money there, as well as our annual Sweets and Sweets fundraiser that we will have again in November, which has earned between $500 and $1,000. So we're projected to earn about another $35,000 to $4,000 on top of the $10,000 that we've already saved for any students who have financial need. So just requesting permission to travel to Florida.
So let's make sure we're all understanding. So this is for next.
Yeah, February
next
2019,
year,
yes, yes.
Mostly because the planning aspect.
Right.
And the fundraising aspect, it's important that you guys get out in front.
Exactly.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the second time you guys?
This would be our third trip.
Third trip, okay, all right, good. In the past, what has been the percentage of the band students that actually participate in the trip? I know not everybody's gonna go even beyond the
Sure.
financial aspect of it. They might have other plans for that vacation, for whatever. So what percentage typically do you get?
I'd say we're probably close to 85%.
Okay, so that's really good.
Yeah, yeah. The last time we traveled, we had 47 students travel, and there were just shy of 60 in the band.
Okay.
So
All right,
most
great,
of them do go.
great. And you talked about the fact that you're already anticipating that not everybody's going to be able to afford that, but you already got your fundraising plans in
Sure,
place, which
yes.
you've executed on before in the past.
Yes.
To great success, so
Yes.
that's great. Okay. All right, any other questions?
Just one question that's actually more directed to Kelly. So this field trip is a little different than some of our other ones, which are school education events. This is sort of almost an extracurricular activity. It's a little different in terms of some of the other field trips. I just want to make sure we're administratively handling it the correct way through our process here.
It's an academic trip. I mean, they're honing their instrumental
Yeah, I'm not
skills,
denying
they're
there's
performing, so I would say it's tied directly into the curriculum.
Just in terms of, I notice it occasionally on the MASC thing, the mailing list, the different types of things like the overseas trips, which are optional but tied to the curriculum, but not a required piece there versus some of our other field trips there. And there's usually, I thought we handled it a little different. We did the same basic process, but I just want to make sure that we're handling. Like I said, this is a slightly different category in terms of the types of field trips that we do.
This would still fall under the auspices of a school-sponsored trip.
Okay.
So it's part of our school offering. Mrs. Bridge is doing this in the capacity of a music teacher. She's not being employed by another agency, so as a result, it would fall under the policy that would have to have it approved as an out-of-state trip.
Okay. And then relative to liability insurance and since it's an officially sponsored school activity.
Covered by our school insurance, yeah.
Okay.
School district insurance, yeah. Okay. Good question, though, because we do have a variety of trips.
Well, no, that's what I mean, and then I guess I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. And then the other part, again, sorry to nitpick the things here, but I think they're important. All right, we're going to raise them. We're not picking up liability if the travel company folds or anything like that. I'm just concerned about making sure that we understand any liabilities that the school district may be under.
They're a reputable company that's been vetted by a number of districts for many years. I certainly don't have any concerns. Hillary, I'm sure you would have mentioned something if you thought there was any chance of.
Yeah, we've gone with the same company every time because it's been a very, very good experience for us. And for what it's worth, I would also agree that it's definitely curricular and it's optional, and we're traveling over February vacation, so students aren't missing any school for it.
Yeah, the reason I bring up about those parts of the liability is I don't know if there's like a trip insurance or other pieces that go with this, i.e. the liability is for those costs are with the travel company, not necessarily the school district. That's what I just want to make sure that I understand where that. It's like outside.
I mean, yeah, it goes beyond the fact that the company could conceivably go out of business and leave us hanging. I mean, there could be weather issues, there could be other travel-related issues that just won't let the trip happen as planned. You know, and we're putting money into the company prior to leaving for the airport. You know, just what are the, you know, maybe we could just double check to see what our the checks and balances are to protect our students and the families who are, you know, making a significant investment.
Right. And I guess
again, hopefully it'll be, you know, just hypothetical.
Yeah. But I mean, it's different than some of the field trips where they send the money to the school, we hold it, pay for the thing here. I just want to make it clear the liability is with the travel company, not with the school district. If there's problems with the, you know, with the travel arrangements.
I mean, there would be a legal recourse if something happened. You know as well as I do, if you have ever looked into this kind of litigation, that there are many variables at stake. But that's why we're very cautious with the companies that we choose. And Hillary, if you wouldn't mind, if you could maybe send me a detailed contract, and I'll just skim it over to make sure those clauses are intact. I'm sure they are, but I'll just do a double check.
Sure.
Like I said, it's mainly to just make sure people understand that where the liability is if something happens, it's the school committee and school district is not reimbursing people for the trip.
And I just want to clarify the earlier point you were making. There are trips available to students, and we know because we have older kids. You get them in the mail that have almost nothing to do with Littleton, but a Littleton teacher may choose to spend his or her time chaperoning that trip, but they're chaperoning as an employee of that company. For this trip and for the DC trip, we contract with professional companies, but it's our trip.
Right.
It's our teachers, it's our chaperones working in the capacity as educators in our district that are in charge of the trip. We're just using those companies to facilitate the travel, the details, et cetera, but it's our trip. And it is directly tied to the curriculum, and we support those. But that's the distinction, because we may find out down the road that a student goes on a trip that happens to have one of her teachers there, but it's totally different.
No, that's what I mean. That's why I brought it up. Is there's subtle differences between these types of trips here, and some of these questions were appropriate for the previous presenter, but she got out quick enough that
she escaped.
Right.
One thing that needs to be mentioned, it was lost in the conversation, that Hillary and the chaperones are doing this over the February break. I mean, that is quite the dedication to the program, and I'd like to thank you and everybody else that's going along to chaperone. I mean, it's going way beyond the call of duty, so to speak, and I know you're just so passionate about this trip and passionate about your program, and we appreciate it. And, Hillary has been with us for
8 years.
8 years now?
Yes.
And you go back 8 years. I'm entering my 8th year. So Hillary was here a year before I came, and look at the changes in our program in terms of numbers and the quality of music that we hear from the students.
Thank you.
You've done a wonderful job in building the program, Hillary.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
As always, any documentation and filming you guys can do and bring back to show us, because it is a legitimate music trip. I mean, like you said, they're going to take advantage of the opportunity to be in the park as tourists.
Of course.
They are also getting exposure to significant professional studio recording, and they'll be out in the park playing.
Maybe after we complete the trip, we can come back, because they give us a really neat souvenir of the Disney footage, but with us scoring.
Yeah,
so
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. I have the previous. We did Aladdin the last time, and then the time before that we did Tarzan. So.
Yeah, that would be something we'd like to see.
Sure.
And be able to put up on the website so you can see that it is a beneficial trip from a musicianship perspective.
I got to say, over the last 2 trips, I had children attend both, attend them, and they really enjoyed it. It was a really great experience for them.
Good, I'm glad they enjoyed it.
Didn't mean to grill you too much.
Well, I mean,
Grilling Kelly, you were
Yeah, that's right, grilling Kelly.
on the screen too, like it does say that there is insurance, and you can see right there. And of course, it's optional; people don't have to buy it. But Bright Spark will come and do a whole parent meeting, and I think at that point, parents understand that we're contracting with Bright Spark, and she's very clear. Our representative is the same one that we've worked with for the last 2 trips, so she knows our program now, and she's very clear about buy the insurance, you get every penny back if you need it. So it's very helpful.
Make a motion to approve the band trip to Disney for February 16th through the 20th, 2019.
23rd to the 23rd.
It's actually just to the 20th. It's 5
Oh,
days.
is it?
The SAP
sorry, I'm
page
looking at
has
the-
a typo. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Oh,
you,
does it?
sorry.
Okay.
Right there it says.
Oh, yep. All right, I'll make them change that too.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Reader Detweiler is going to talk about the IEP process.
Good evening. I hope you find this as interesting as some of the other presentations. But I do find it really interesting because I think this goes to the heart of what we do as educators and what you do as a school committee to help sustain the system around us. So I'd like to start with the first slide. And I'd like to start with the premise that each of us are very unique individuals. And what does it mean to be unique? It means that we are the only one, that there is no one like us, that there is no equal. And this is important because I think we have to both try to fit in, but also understand our differences. And they're differences that are genetic, they have roots in our cultural and in our religious influences, and in the experiences of our life. But this also has implications for an educational setting. And the implications are that there will be a very wide range of diversity within the student body. Okay, so how do we, the next slide, how do we get a sense of our profile of abilities? Well, I think there are lots of ways we go about doing that. First of all, we all do it naturally. We do it by sort of exploring the world, deciding what we like, kind of self-sorting into what we feel we do well. We get feedback. And in educational settings, we also have certain types of information that we try to gather. And I think as teachers become more skilled, they become very good at observation of their students. They develop their judgment. They have insight into cultural differences. And we also do certain types of assessment. Certainly that looks at the current performance, but it also tries to look at performance over time. So one of the types of informations that sources that we use are standardized evaluations. And again, these are administered by our staff. So I want to talk a little bit about the staff who work in our schools. And I want to make the point that this is staff that probably shows up in the budget as special educators, but they're not just restricted to what they do with students who are on IEPs. They service all of the students in our school. They consult to all of our teachers. So we have 4 school psychologists, and they will be the ones who will do a cognitive evaluation. They look at the behavioral and the emotional and the academic performance of students. We have 3.8 speech and language pathologists, and they'll look specifically at the language system. We have 2.1 occupational therapists, and again, they work with fine motor. 1 PT for the entire system, and that individual works with gross motor issues. And then we have board-certified behavior analysts, BCBAs we call them, 1.8, and they really focus on behavior analysis. Sometimes an assessment could also have a home and a health component. That depends on the needs of the child. But I thought it's interesting to sort of look at our specific numbers, and I calculated that last year, well, actually in FY16, we conducted 187 evaluations, and the past year 171, so that seems about average. So that's 5 evaluations per week, and that keeps this staff busy in that aspect of their job. But as I said, they also have many other aspects in ways they contribute to our students by consulting and by servicing all students. You do not have to be on an IEP to have the benefit of working with some of our specialists. So when we get to a standardized evaluation, these can be beneficial for anyone. You can go out and get one of these done independently. Parents can request one from the school system. But they're almost always part of the process of determining eligibility for an IEP. And it's also just important to note that in a school system, we do have a time frame to complete these. There's 30 school days to test, and then an additional 15 to hold a team meeting. So what do we do with this information when we get it from all our different sources? And this, I think, is the heart of what, no, I'm ready. This is the heart of what really happens in a school system. So differentiation is really at the heart of what educators need to learn to do, and this often distinguishes the master teacher from teachers who are just very good or becoming master teachers. And the challenge is that the school curriculum is really a fixed set. It's a fixed set of grade level standards, and it has very heavy demands on language and social skills. And it is kind of rigid. It really is sort of a one-size-fits-all. And I think it's good to have standards. I think that's something that Massachusetts was sort of ahead on in the 90s of developing a set of standards. And I think there certainly can be a lot of discussion around, are the standards developmentally appropriate? And that's for a different time, but I think there is good discussion and a good understanding of what should be expected at different developmental levels. But it is a one-size-fits-all. So the challenge for educators is the extent to which we can differentiate and take into account a student's unique profile will maximize the success. And this differentiation is done along a continuum. Okay? So we think of it as a tiered level of support. And Tier 1 is for all students in the general education curriculum. That's everybody. That includes students on IEPs. They should also be in the general ed classroom. Then for those students who need some remedial support, that's Tier 2. And then Tier 3 is even a smaller group, and that is where special education has its unique document of an IEP. Okay, so if we could look at Tier 1 for a moment, and really all students deserve some differentiation because we're all unique. So what we've done in Littleton, 2 years ago, the staff throughout the district worked together to develop the District Curriculum Accommodation Plan, the DCAP, we call it. And I just picked out a few of the examples that's within the DCAP. And any teacher is free to use this, expected to use this, so they can provide extended time for a student. We usually like to quantify the amount in advance, and it can't be a task where time is what's being measured. They can provide both visual and oral instructions. They can offer breaks. They can provide strategic seating. And of course, all students can have access to audiobooks. And the administration also supports the development of this differentiation for their staff through professional development. And I think you've heard that we've done a lot with executive functioning. We brought in Dr. Peg Dawson for our entire faculty. We brought them in another year in addition to that for just our clinical staff. All teachers have had to become more versed in sheltered English instruction for students for whom English is not their first language. So this is really sort of the ongoing growth that teachers do in the profession, and it is leads to a lot of good discussion, but it is the first step in differentiation because every child will need some level of differentiation. So, and I think this is solidly in place in our district. So what happens for those students who do need some additional support? This is what we call Tier 2. And as a student moves from Tier 1 to Tier 2, a school system really has to begin to figure out how are they going to identify these students who are struggling. It requires a use of data and screening. This should not be a lengthy process, though. This is nothing like the standardized evaluations I talked about. This is really a process that should be an easy in and an easy out. But you do need a robust system of remediation. And I do think that as an administrative team, we really sort of looked at our Tier 2 and really tried to see are there ways that we can improve upon it. But I want to give you some examples of what we already do have in place. We do have some student support team process in place. We also do have some remediation. At Shaker Lane, there are 2 full-time reading specialists, and that's a good example of Tier 2. And at the Littleton Middle School, we have an academic support center. And for the past 2 years, we've been able to have really a supported study at the high school. And these were certainly the high school support. There really was nothing before we started to add that. So again, it is an area that schools really do have to continue to try to grow and allocate resources in this area. And so after you go through a process of meeting, and the meeting can involve parents, the team in essence develops a plan, and then they need to evaluate the effectiveness of the plan. And this is really a pre-referral process. All students who are beginning to have some difficulty should go through Tier 2 before they even get to Tier 3. So at Tier 3, though, this is what I think people would most likely recognize as special education. And this is when a student is not making effective progress at the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 level, and then they are referred for the very comprehensive evaluation that we conduct, and this is to determine their eligibility for services. But up to this point, we've, as educators, been rather limited in the extent to which we can differentiate. We're not supposed to take students out of the curriculum. We're really not supposed to take them out of the classroom unless there's parental permission. But at this point, the IEP is really just a document that allows us to differentiate beyond what we can do for other students. And this is kind of interesting because it becomes a legal document that binds the district to provide these services. And this is our only way to significantly modify a student's curriculum. And really now, instead of one size fits all, it's your program fits just you. Does that make sense? So for an example, if a student is enrolled in 4th grade, they can be taught a 2nd grade curriculum if that is the level at which they're functioning. And I think that's interesting, especially when we get to the use of data from MCAS. I think there is some value in having students who are on IEPs take a grade level test, although you don't want it to be something that's harmful to the student's self-esteem. You don't want it to be something that's going to make them feel that they're not successful. But it is sometimes good to see how far off a student whose curriculum is not at grade level is relative to grade level. But it is difficult when the state uses it to evaluate the effectiveness of a school. Does that make sense? Because in essence, we're given the permission to not teach them grade level, yet we're then told, on the other hand, we're going to give you a grade level test, and if you're not there, somehow you're not being successful. It sort of dishonors what I think an IEP is supposed to do. But anyway, so an IEP really is, as I say, the way that we just go to that farther end of differentiation. So I think it's interesting to look at, well, how often is it necessary for a student to be on an IEP? And these are some percentages. There's a national average of 13% of a student body will be on an IEP. In Massachusetts, the average is 17.4%, and in Littleton, our average is 20.2. Now, this looks a little bit higher, but it's not that significant. As a matter of fact, if you go on our district's profile, because we do a large analysis of special education status, we do not disproportionately identify students in special education. Does that make sense? Although, you know, it does cause us to look and say, is there something we're not doing with differentiation at either Tier 1 or Tier 2? Because I think we have a relatively healthy student body coming into our schools. I mean, a tribute to the community of Littleton. I've always been in meetings where I usually get 2 parents, and there's a lot of still very good health in the overall community. What I do think is interesting is if you look at the gender breakdown, out of the 333 Littleton students who are on IEPs, 70% are male and 30% are female. And that's fairly consistent that you'll see in a lot of school districts. And the question is, why is it that there are often so many more males? And again, I think you have to go back and look at some of the expectations of what it is to be in school. It's very language-laden, and sometimes boys develop language a little bit slower. There's also very high demand on social skills. And sometimes I think we miss what are some of the inherent talents, certainly in the nonverbal realm, that a lot of males exhibit where females don't. So look at the criteria in order to qualify for an IEP. These are the questions that a team will ask. Does the student have one or more disabilities? Is the student making effective progress? Is the lack of progress the result of the disability? And does the student require specially designed instruction in order to make effective progress, or a related service such as speech and language, OT and PT, in order to access the curriculum? So in your packet, I gave you the categories that we use in Massachusetts of disabilities. But let's take a look at how this plays out in our distribution of IEPs in Littleton. So these are our numbers, and I broke it into 3 columns. One is our preschool and kindergarten, and that's because at that level we primarily use the category of developmental delay, which is very appropriate. They're little, they're hard to sometimes test and get good information on, and a delay just acknowledges that, yeah, we see that they need some support. But then look at the category of the students ages 6 to 21, and you see the highest, most students are in the category of specific learning disability. That just means they're having difficulty mastering math calculation, reading comprehension, reading fluency, written expression. I think beneath that, though, it's important to highlight those next two categories. Autism, we have 34 students who have that as their disability category that qualifies them, and we have 29 students who have an emotional disability, and that's why they qualify for service. Health, ADHD captures health, and that's up to 45. So you can see those numbers. I think they're interesting because this is what I sort of look at when I analyze where is it that we could develop a program for these students. Because if we can develop the program in district, then we don't have to go out of district. But again, to look at that last column then, the number of students who are in out-of-district placements, the highest number is for students who have an emotional disability. And these are students who really need a therapeutic setting. They really need the ongoing support on an hourly basis of staff who have that level of clinical support to help them develop the strategies that they need in order to manage themselves emotionally, but also learn. And then we have autism, and these are students who have usually a very significant manifestation of their autism. Oftentimes they're not verbal, and so they also need a program that exceeds what we can provide in the Littleton Public Schools. And some of that is because of our size, but I think hopefully this is helpful because it gives you a sense of where we see the numbers and how we program for them. So let's go on to the next one. But the second question is the student making effective progress? And this requires being able to gauge progress across years. This is actually quite hard to do. Most districts have a hard time with this because it means that you have to manage your assessment data. And it's hard to blend different kinds of assessment data into one system. We usually tend to kind of silo these. We usually have our MCAS data, we'll have our MAP data, but it is hard to get one system that keeps it all for one student. But we also take into account parent reports and a student self-report. They're both very important. But this is actually kind of the gray area. When teams get together to look at eligibility, oftentimes the disability category is very insightful. And I think parents feel almost like, okay, now I understand my child better. They really benefit from the explanation that comes from our specialists. And so rarely does a team have a problem with, okay, yes, there's a disability here. But the question of effective progress does make it a little more difficult because what does progress look like? And of course, parents are concerned when their child begins to fall behind, legitimately so. So let's go to, yes, so eligibility is a team decision. It is not made just by staff. It is made by everybody around the table. And this would include parents and guardians, actually the student also when it's appropriate. We're supposed to invite students to meetings at the age of 14. You need at least one general education teacher, one special education teacher, any staff who are credentialed to interpret results, any other individual who might have pertinent knowledge. Sometimes we'll have a nurse in our meetings. And you do need a representative of the school district who can commit district resources. because you need to be able to take action in the meeting. But again, it is a team decision. And I think it's important to note that eligibility can change. Typically, this really changes with developmental delay, but it can happen at any level that a student is able to make some accommodations and be successful. So we have 8 students who have become eligible this year. 5 at Shaker Lane, which makes sense because they're little, because we're still understanding them, but also 3 at Littleton High School, because you could have a disability that you have been able to somehow manage and work around, but finally you're getting to a point where the curriculum might be exceeding what is going to be your own ability to work around. Does that make sense? As an example, for instance, most of us master English as our first language, but if you have a disability in your phonetic processing or phonological memory, mastering a second language can be challenging for you, and you might want to pick your language depending upon the demands of that language. But we've also had 12 students who have been determined to no longer be eligible, and again, this is spread across all the schools. But again, these decisions of whether a student is eligible or not eligible, again, is a team decision. It is not dictated by school staff. As a matter of fact, parents, once their child's on an IEP, they have stay-put rights to those services on the IEP. So a school district can't just decide, we're taking you off. And there is a standard. When we develop an IEP, and this was actually interesting, there was a recent Supreme Court case that established this as the standard, and it says a school must offer an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So I think this is kind of the first time that the Supreme Court actually embedded in light of the child's circumstances. So again, I think it speaks to that. We do need to understand the differences that we all have and what are the unique circumstances for this child. And again, to emphasize, staff, actually back to the other one, staff and parents develop an IEP together. This is a collaborative process, and parents have to agree to an IEP before we can implement it. And I think I actually looked at this today. I asked my administrative assistant, how many IEPs do we have that are in a state of some portion of it being rejected, where a parent has disagreed with what we've done, either in whole or in part? And there are none that have been rejected in whole. And there are only 6 that have been rejected in part. And so that is a 99.8% level of agreement between our staff and our parents. And again, I think that's a real testimony to the rapport that our staff build with parents and the level of discourse that guides this process and the real desire to have it work and be collaborative. But sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, that's real too. And so there are many avenues to try to resolve our differences. Whenever we do get an IEP that might have a rejected portion, we always offer to re-meet. If there is a full rejection of an IEP or a partial rejection, we have to notify the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, and the parents receive a letter notifying them that they have some options for resolution. One option is to try to do a facilitated IEP meeting where you bring in someone from the outside to help guide the team through the process. We have never really needed that because, again, I think most of our meetings happen in a very congenial and collaborative way. There is mediation, and this is a voluntary process where either a parent can ask to bring in a mediator from the state or the school district can ask. We do about 1 or 2 of these a year, and they're usually very fruitful, and we will come to an agreement. The mediator is helpful because they kind of give feedback to both sides, like, yeah, that's reasonable, or no, that's not. And then the last step would be a hearing with the Bureau of Special Education Appeals. This is actually quite rare. I think there's something like 8,000 to 10,000 rejected IEPs across the state in any given year, and only about 15 or 20 cases actually go before the Bureau and are decided by an independent hearing officer. I think it was 2 years ago where Littleton did go to the Bureau of Special Education Appeals. in one case, and we prevailed in all aspects of that case. So again, it's certainly not where we want to go because we want to try to resolve them at a lower level, but I was, again, compliments to our staff when we went there. The hearing officer really deemed that we had been appropriate in all aspects of managing that process. And lastly, after the team has an IEP, we need to determine the placement. And it needs to be along with the guidance that it has to be in the least restrictive environment. That's the standard. So a full inclusion program means the child is taken out of the classroom probably only about 20% of the time, and it kind of goes down from there, whether it's partial, substantially separate. We in our district only have full and partial programs. We do not have any programs that are substantially separate. That's really probably what you see in some of those therapeutic programs where we need to send students with significant emotional disabilities. There are separate day programs. We try to always use our public collaborative options first because, again, that's considered less restrictive than a private day program. There are residential placements that we sometimes need, a home program or a hospital program, and we've used all of those. So let's look at our in-district placements for a moment. And again, I think to meet the needs of the students in the district, over the course of my tenure, we have developed a language arts-based program, a continuum that goes from grade 3 through grade 12. And this is, again, for students who have disabilities that are rooted in their communication system. So again, I think we've been very successful at developing a high-caliber program and keeping students in. We have a foundations-based curriculum that goes from kindergarten through age 22, and these are the students who typically would be significantly off of grade level curriculum. And they need a slower pace, they need a kind of distilled curriculum that wouldn't cover everything at a grade level. I think I feel particularly pleased with our vocational and transition program. This is something we've developed at the high school. It's really sort of the new, well, it's not new, it's always been there, but the expectation that students are prepared for college or career, and some of our students will go into careers and not into college. And we hired a teacher specifically for this program. If you remember, the town supported the renovation of a small room off of the high school cafeteria. We call it the Bistro, and it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for students there to learn how to do some basic life skills around cooking for themselves or cleaning, and also for students who are more able to go out and learn how to work in a restaurant. So again, I think over the time I've been here, I see parents wanting to stay in. I think that they feel that there are some specialized programs that meet their child's needs, and that in that way then they get to have both, sort of the best of both worlds. They get to have this tailored program, but then they also benefit from all of the tangible and intangible benefits that come from remaining in district, the friendships that can grow up across the years. But there are some students that we do support for out-of-district placements. And we do have an out-of-district coordinator who really helps parents in this process. We want parents to have the opportunity often to explore different places so that they have a sense of what's the right fit. And as I mentioned before, the most prevalent areas of disability that do need the support of an out-of-district placement are students with emotional challenges or autism. So, in conclusion, I do believe this, and I think educators do, all of us embrace this, that every child has a right to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And this can only happen when we understand and embrace our differences and strive to tailor our teaching to match a child's unique profile. So again, I want to thank the school committee, because without you, we would not be able to sustain the environment that we have in Littleton, to grow programs for students with real needs for differentiation, even to support all of our staff in the professional development we can offer them. So again, I hope you have a good budget season, because it is a very important mission. Okay, any questions?
Thank you. Questions, Daryl?
Thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough. I do have one. Let me just flip back to it. On the chart,
Yep.
criteria to qualify for an IEP. There, as you were going through it, you know, I caught on the words, you know, in terms of access to the curriculum at grade level and the other pieces there. But at the same time, you know, between the tier 2, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, there may be other services that, are there services that are only on the IEP that are not directly curriculum related that may need to be accessed for at some of the other levels there?
Some of the other levels?
It just seems that you emphasize curriculum level tracking, but some of the other services are not always, didn't always strike me as necessarily directly curriculum related.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Could you maybe just address
Sure.
that just a little bit?
Counseling as a service, for instance. There are, students have access without an IEP to our school psychologists and to our guidance staff. And that is certainly not an academic service. But then only, actually very few who really have it then on their IEP itself. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I have
can
to
add
admit,
something.
I'm not involved in,
Yeah.
any direct experience with this, but it seems to be conflict occasionally between some of these other services, which sometimes don't always get interpreted as curriculum-related services. And maybe I'm misunderstanding some of the concerns raised to me there, but.
Curriculum-related service.
I can
Again,
help,
you,
Daryl.
maybe you can help
Yeah.
me clarify me here.
As a district, first of all, we've worked very hard to dull the line between special education and tier 1 and 2 support.
Right.
So it's not uncommon to have services that may appear in an IEP that we're offering in a tier 2 environment. What's different is the intensity of the service. So I think that's part of what you were
Yeah, because I think
asking.
sometimes it comes across you can't get access to those services until you're on the IEP, and that's what I wanted to just make sure, just the way you phrased the language, I wanted to just maybe clarify that a little bit.
We've really worked hard to, in fact, it's been a mission of both Rita and my own to develop a culture where the access to those services aren't definitive and they're blended. We really want a system where students can, for lack of a better phrase, free flow, where if we need a student that needs assistance in an area temporarily, we should be providing that service, and we shouldn't be too concerned about putting them on an IEP and giving them a label. You have to remember that when you put a student on an individual educational program, there's a label. And it's not good or bad, it's something that needs to be pointed out. We don't want to attach a label to a child, even for a year or two, if it's not necessary. So we're very cautious, and I'm glad you raised that, Daryl. It's really interesting. As time has progressed in my career, there was a time for many, many years that it was the conversations with parents to get them to jump into an IEP realm was very, very difficult because of the label. Now, as a profession, we've spent many years reversing that, and rightly so. But sometimes and Rita and I have these conversations all the time. I think we've done such a good job in this profession that people forget that it is something that travels with a student for a period of time. And I'm not saying that's negative, but it means that if you're going to put a student on an IEP, it's not changing what you're going to have for lunch. It's something that is substantially different. And we hope that parents understand that and we explain it to them. And our indication of success is in some areas, you have to look at what the IEP is structured to do, but if we have students that are able to overcome the challenges that they have in terms of the reason why they've been put on an IEP, that's a tremendous success. It's a celebration. It shouldn't be viewed as, well, the school is just not going to provide services. We take, and every school takes that very, very seriously. And it's our hope that we have as many students as possible as they go through our system, reach that point of independence again, where they're in the regular education classroom. Does that help?
Yeah, no, and thank you for just sort of explaining it a little bit more, because I think sometimes people are seem to be under the impression, or is if they don't get the IEP, they don't get access to the spectrum of services there, and that's why I just tagged on to the curriculum modification piece, which, you know, it's very concrete to me, that piece there, versus the variation of support services that might not need quite that level there. The other thing I typically point out to people is, you know, this whole process is not actually a school committee function. Here, we support you via our budget process, but the school committee is not involved in any of these individual level decisions. There.
I think I have another example for you, Daryl. We have a curriculum at Russell Street, Responsive Classroom, which is a good Tier 1 intervention, differentiation that all students get, and it really helps them develop a sense of classroom community. But then there might be certain classrooms where things are just not meshing well. Fifth grade girls can be notorious for having problems, but that's not limited just to them. So we might that teacher might ask, and with consultation of the clinical staff in that building, like the psychologist and the guidance, they could go in and do a targeted, sometimes a 10-week lesson just around bullying. But then there still might be a child who is very vulnerable to bullying. Maybe they don't have a good sense of social awareness, and so they become they're more they can be targeted more easily. They can be upset by situations, and so that is a situation where that child might need to be taken out of the classroom. So that becomes Tier 3. Does that make sense? And then they'd meet individually with the guidance staff. I think what's important from a budget perspective, because I think sometimes people see there's this much of the budget that's special education. And I think what they don't understand is, or what I'm hoping that they understand, is that our specialists, whether they are psychologists, speech and language pathologists, and even our special education teachers, serve the general population. They just don't serve students on IEPs. The only cost that's really restricted just to students on IEPs and just IEPs are the out-of-district placements. And even at that level, we are supported by circuit breaker. So again, people see this like large percentage of the budget, but they don't understand all the assessments people do, all the consultations they do, all the work that, as I just gave an example, that any of our specialists can go into a classroom and do. So it is a benefit to everyone, not just special education.
And our DCAP plan has really made a difference in terms of blending regular education with special education. They have a well-defined DCAP plan that's reviewed yearly and is gone over with staff every year and discussed. It becomes part of what they do. It becomes part of our culture, and that's certainly helped as well. One of the other differences that we really didn't talk about is the fact 7 years ago, a lot of the specialty staff that Rita had introduced there didn't exist in our district. We were contracting those services out. And what we found is that at times there wasn't a sharing of philosophy and ideals. And by having our own staff, it created an opportunity for us to move forward in unison with a culture, with the same expectations. And we had these people, the same people every day. And it created a much greater consistency in what we were doing, and also consistency in evaluation approaches as well. So that was I felt it was a significant change in direction when we brought our own staff in for those positions.
But we hired 2 psychologists from the time I've been here. Could you just go to the next slide for Tier 2 for a second? Because again, I think that this is really what from my perception, most parents are trying to access remedial supports. I think most parents do not see their child as being significantly out of curriculum. Does that they really need an IEP, but they want remedial supports because their child is going to be below average for one reason or another. It's not, as I say, it's really that mismatch. It's really not a flaw in the child as much as it is a mismatch from their abilities to our curriculum. And this is an area that I think we've had a lot of good discussion on as an administrative team, is how can we grow this area? Because this is what, we don't want to wait 45 days to get a child on an IEP. That doesn't help the child when the child needs the help, and they're usually very frustrated and the parents are upset. So we need to work on our Tier 2 system. And I think there's been some movement on that, but I think that's really an area that I think we should continue to look at, reallocate our services more to this area. But even as I spoke about sort of a pre-referral plan, special education teachers are often part of a pre-referral plan. So with the permission of a parent, we could take a child out of the classroom for a pre-referral period in this Tier 2 level of support, and they could work with a special education teacher for 6 to 8 weeks, because it's a way of seeing, is there something that this teacher knows that the general education teacher doesn't know, or do they really, and so that teacher could consult to the gen ed teacher, or do they really need the expertise of a special education teacher? So Tier 2 is a very creative area, and I think that is that's really the important area in a school. I'll put it that way. Tier 3, we know what we do in Tier 3. Tier 1, I think we have a good process for working on, but Tier 2 still could have time spent on it.
Yeah, and while we're talking about this, can you talk about what triggers this Tier 2 remedial support? Like, how does the student first get, how do the parents get notified, or, what's the process of identifying these students?
Yep, definitely. Actually, part of the DCAP has a flow chart within it, and I don't have that with me. I don't know if we can pull it up, if we can pull up the DCAP. But it should be part of what we call a student support team. And I think it's done slightly differently in different schools, which is perhaps appropriate, but I think we need to have some more consistency around that. One thing I think we need to be more consistent in it is, at what point do we involve parents?
Right.
And I myself advocate that I think it's appropriate for a team to get together once and kind of understand what the teacher's concerns are, but then I like teams to invite the parent in before they really develop any kind of a plan. I think it helps parents understand that staff is taking action. They understand how we can go through that process, and it really helps parents go through the pre-referral and not leap right into an evaluation.
But then my question is, so why are they referred in the first place? Is it because they're not making the effective progress, or what is it? Like,
yes.
What makes it?
Sure.
And then is that not means to be, qualified for an IEP in the Tier 3? So.
Well, that's where I'm saying effective progress is the part where it's hard for parents and staff to sometimes understand it the same way. Because if you think that special education picks up the lowest 17% of students, there is going to be a group of students between the 20th and the 50th percentile who are not at grade level necessarily. They could be a half a year below grade level. And this is very distressing for parents and children, because they feel that they are not up with their peers, and it becomes a real sort of an emotional self-judgment then that they put on themselves. And teachers track this. They track it through the MAP data, they track it through the DIBELS data, data teams meet, and so it's typically not a mystery to our staff as to which students are beginning to fall behind, and that's why at Shaker Lane, for instance, they can get them right over into those reading teachers. Does that make sense? But that is the hardest group to really program for, those students who don't qualify for an IEP because they're not so significantly off of curriculum, but they're not at grade level. That is a hard group. And that's where Tier 2, if you have a really good Tier 2 system, it can meet those students' needs.
And I guess this kind of also ties in, sorry. Go ahead. And so on one of the pages, there's something about, tracking the data of a particular student over, gauging effective progress entails analyzing information across years.
Right.
And so, does it always require years of data to make a student eligible? Like, I can
No.
imagine something happens and.
No, it can be within a year.
Right. Okay.
For instance, the MAP data, we track, winter, fall, winter, spring. You do want to have, but the problem is not necessarily the time that you have it. It's kind of really meshing all the different types of sources of data that we have and making sense of it. Because MAP data tests something a little differently than MCAS. So we get these scores and you have to try to make sense out of them and integrate them. But it really is a challenge for districts to have good assessment systems. But you don't need multiple years of data. No, we don't, and that's, again, where Tier 2 comes right in, because as soon as a child starts to fall behind, we want to get them the help. I think if you go down a little bit further, or is it in there, you're going to find it definitely, where there is the flow chart. I think keep going a little bit more.
Almost at the end.
It is in there. Maybe it's closer to the beginning.
Yeah, I didn't see a flow chart. Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, if you find it, great, we'll continue the discussion. But if we don't find it tonight, let's find it and integrate it into the presentation that we post online.
Definitely.
We can definitely do that. All right.
When I sit down, I'll go to my computer, and I think I can pull it up and send it to Stephen, maybe.
Yep.
You can send it to you,
Exactly.
and then we can post it as you request.
Any other questions or comments?
No, back to zero.
The only thing I was curious, if you go to the slide with the disability categories and distribution, the only thing I would like to see, I'd be curious to see it broken down more by grades, because I'm curious
By
to see how often, what the percentage of students transitioning off IEPs by the time they graduate are. As far as, I would think that you would see a higher percentage at the lower grades on IEPs.
It's actually, that would be good data. That would be interesting to look at.
Because I'm just curious, because, I mean, you don't have an IEP for life, so it's like
Right,
something,
right.
I think the goal is to give these kids the skills to work, and get the strategies to be successful without the IEP.
Right.
So that the fact the disability may still exist, but if the student's able to make effective progress through
Right.
strategies
Right.
when they go to college or whatnot, I'd just be curious to see what percentage of students. That'd be my only suggestion, is to be able to see something
Sure.
along that lines.
Sure, I can say, I know that we test mostly in third, fourth, and fifth grade, because that's, again, where you're going to start to see some of the real challenges of the curriculum. But I do think it's important to honor that you could have a disability manifest at any level.
Right.
Even in college, because you've been able to accommodate on your own up until that point, and then it exceeds what you can do. Because it's kind of interesting how, we're going to use the word clueless, we sometimes are about ourselves. Does that make sense? I think it's good to have an evaluation, just like you go to a health physical, go have a good cognitive evaluation, because you'll learn a lot.
And students have a standard.
Right.
They're reevaluated every 3 years for the.
The eligibility is redetermined. They don't have to be reevaluated. If we, again, we can waive evaluations,
Okay.
but we do have to revisit the question of eligibility every 3 years. At least every 3 years. You can do it sooner. Right.
I have a few comments. So this was very edifying. There is obviously a significant process, a significant investment in time and resources on a daily basis across the spectrum of students. We talk about, the numbers of kids that are actually on IEPs, but that's really not the point. The point is that, every student is being evaluated at some point to see if they require some type of intervention. And I think that's important. The other thing is that it is a process that the parents have, and Jen, you asked a great question, like what triggers it? And most often it's by the staff, because they see the kids every day and they have the training and the professional background to be able to say, the student is doing fine, but we think they should be doing better, and let's think about this. But parents can reach out at any point and ask for that evaluation process to take place, and then we'll see where it goes from there. I appreciate that we brought up budget and talking some aspects of that. I'd like to expand on that a little bit. when you look at our cost centers, when we do our presentation in the spring, we have the regular ed cost center and the special ed cost center. And we have other cost centers, but those are the two big ones that in my mind, that's where we deliver the curriculum. If you take those two line items and add them up and then figure out what the percentage is, 43% of those two line items are special education funding for both in-district and out-of-district placements. That's significant. And again, it's to me, a testament to how much time and effort and resources we commit to all the students in the district. When we do the budget, and I've been on the budget subcommittee for 12 years now, there's never, and all of our meetings are posted in our public meetings when we do budget subcommittee, and both between the budget subcommittee, our meetings here when we talk about budget, and our joint meetings that we have with the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen, we never talk about, gee, we're spending too much on special education, we need to cut that. The things that we talked about, decisions based on the criteria of effective progress and least restrictive placement, is what drives the amount of money we need to spend on special education. That's the horse. The cart goes behind it. Everything else in our budget follows that. Once we've made that determination about how much money we need to spend to make all of our students have effective progress in the least restrictive environment, we make the rest of the budget work past that. When we had the recession several years ago and we had to cut staff, there wasn't one single discussion about cutting special education staff or funding. It was all geared towards either regular education or the cost centers beyond delivering curriculum into the students. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have been aggressive over the last year, during your tenure here, to bring services into the district. And at times, it was difficult to explain to the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom why that was beneficial and necessary, because they see the head count going up. They see the fringe benefits that they have to pay, and those are legitimate concerns. But we knew that it was, and the reason that we were doing it, and we pitched it to them as, look, it actually saves us money because these things are expensive to do out of district. But that wasn't the reason why it was brought to the budget subcommittee by the administration. It was brought to us because they said it will be better for the students and the families.
That's right.
That's why we want to do it, and that's why we went and got it done and made sure the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee understood that it's a win-win for all of us.
And that's why also we've been advocating for the budget language that the Board of Selectmen use from a level services, what they use with all the other departments, to a required services, because we are required to deliver services independent of the budget process.
That's a great point. I mean, when we think about that, people were thinking, well, that's because your busing contract goes up and you have to level service the budget, you got to have that go up. That's true. There are things we do beyond, but the real driver of what we contend as level service is typically our special education budget. And that's why we do advocate for that language. It's meaningful to us, and it needs to be meaningful to the community at large. That's why we keep harping on it. And we'll talk about that again later tonight when we talk about the budget subcommittee update and going to joint meetings next week.
But I do want to thank the school committee, because I think you really do understand that it is in the best interest of this child, and if it were your child, you'd want that. So,
one thing we didn't say, and it needs to be said, is we're not perfect. We strive for perfection. And there are two areas that, for me, that still come to the forefront. And I put my parent hat on. When a family has a young child that is struggling with some aspect of schooling, it's tough. And there's a natural tendency to want to ramp up the intervention as fast as possible. And we continue to try to find better ways to communicate that it's not as if we don't want to ramp it up. We want to ramp it up enough to make a difference, but not excessively. It needs to be a process, and it's not as if we're denying services. We want to do what's right for that child and have the right interventions for that child. And I think that's a point that really needs to be hammered home this evening. It's not about not wanting X number of students on an IEP. It's all about making sure that we're giving the students the services that through a methodical process are going to be the most beneficial to that student at the time. And if that doesn't work out, then we would ramp up that intervention and go into an IEP. The second component is, like any district, we have students that come into our district that have needs that we've never seen before. And we work very, very hard to find experts in the field that we bring in to help us integrate that student into our district, and also help us determine whether or not the long-term prognosis for this student is an in-district or out-of-district placement. I mean, we've been fortunate to have a fellow with us for 6 years now, who 5 years is the best in the state in dealing with students with emotional needs. He's known as the best, and we've been able to snag him and keep him for that time. Unfortunately, he's retiring next year, and I'm begging that he stays on part-time with us. I hope I succeed. But those are the two areas that I think really warranted some discussion also this evening. We strive to become the best we can be.
Definitely.
But I'm never going to sit here as a superintendent and say we're there.
Right.
Because we're not.
Rita alluded to that. She said that you were very explicit about recognizing that our Tier 2 interventions, need to continue to develop and be improved. And you also were, it was edifying to me again that, we think about special education as the IEP and or the out of district, but in reality, the majority of in terms of the number of students that are receiving services in that Tier 2 area. Now, certainly, the students that require the most significant intervention, are important to us, and it's, and like you said, Kelly, I agree, you said it, we get that, we know what we're doing, and then it's striving to improve those Tier 2 interventions and to improve the process, improve the amount of time, elapsed time, and the effectiveness. I think that's what we want to hear that as a school committee, that you're acknowledging that, we need to continue to get better at it and are striving towards that. So that's important too.
Definitely, because I think we can take our special education teachers and they can also service in Tier 2. Like I said, they're not just Tier 3. And I think if you had about even, let's say, 30% of your population at a Tier 2 level, that is appropriate, right? We don't want any child who's below grade level to have to feel unsuccessful in a classroom. And that's, again, where I think there really is this blending of special ed and general ed that people don't really understand. They just see big numbers for special ed.
That was one of the most challenging changes, though, that we made in our district, was the not only the awareness, but the expectation that our special education teachers can go into the Tier 2 arena. That was a transformational change. It didn't happen overnight.
No. But we have a wonderful staff. I really have to compliment the special education staff. I think people should feel very comfortable in putting their trust in these people. I think they do make a difference. Very professional. I'm going to really miss the group of people I work with, as well as the administrative team.
You guys also, at this point, Amy was taking some good notes, and I asked her if she wanted to come up and make some public input before the end of the meeting. So, Amy, you're welcome to come to the podium. Sure. And we know who you are, but if you can just remind me.
So Amy Tarlow Lewis, I'm at Omega Way in Littleton, and I have 2 kids on IEPs, one who's in district, one who's out of district. No surprise, part of the 70% of the boys. Shocker. So I just kind of wanted to ask a question. I had gotten a letter maybe the end of September, early October, and then it had said that there was a wait list for kids on services. And I wanted to understand more about that number. I was wondering, who are those kids? What are they waiting for? Are they all at Shaker Lane? Are they kids who don't yet have formal diagnoses, whether it be a dyslexia, Asperger's, written expressing disorder? I'm just trying to understand more about what that means.
Yeah, the microphone helps the television audience very much.
Well, we can't have a wait list for an IEP, a student on an IEP. As soon as that IEP is signed by the parents, we have to implement it. And it has to be implemented in its totality. We can't say, well, sorry, we don't have speech and language. I mean, occasionally we might run into something where there might be a gap of like 2 or 3 weeks because someone might be out on a maternity leave or something like that. But we have to implement IEPs. We cannot say, as a matter of fact, that's why in the composition of people who are in the team meeting, you have to have somebody who can commit district resources. If it's not one of us as an administrator, it is the special education teacher. And if they're going to commit resources, oftentimes they should let their principal know before they do that. But in that meeting, the decisions have to be made and the commitments have to be made to the family. And as soon as the document's signed, then the services have to begin. And if there's some reason why that doesn't happen, I can say once or twice I've known of an oversight in communication where somebody didn't realize that an IEP was signed, and so there was a gap of, I think, 5 weeks before something started. We have to make up those services as compensatory services. So a parent is due the full service that's there in that IEP. So for an IEP, there can't be a wait period.
That's concerning to me that's your interpretation, though. I mean, that is very concerning. So if you have any information that you can forward me.
Yeah, I just didn't
that would
understand
be-
what that meant. I mean, being a parent of 2 kids with an IEP, I know they're legally entitled to services once the IEP is signed. But I was worried about this. I was essentially worried about like other families. Like, what does that mean for them to not be on services or have to wait for services? Like, I didn't know what that meant.
I appreciate you asking that, Kelly. So Amy, if you do have the letter or something, because it may be a question of phrasing or context, and the letter may have misconveyed the point they were trying to make in raising a legitimate concern, and if we can address it, then we can make sure that we're not making that same mistake again.
I mean, if that's the interpretation of what
Right.
we received, we need to figure out
Right,
what's
exactly.
wrong with the
Clearly
language.
was not done correctly.
And so I also just want to say, I'm also, even though I have 2 boys, I'm also kind of concerned about, the lower rate of females who are being identified. I think one of my children is very obviously disruptive in the classroom. The other one is not so much, but I think girls tend to be very quiet. They're very passive. They're looking out the window. I think, just having friends of daughters, that they have been overlooked over time, and I think we need to do a better job of identifying females at a younger age.
Different manifestations of
Yeah,
problems.
I
that
think
are
it's
so-
very easy when they're sitting there quietly. It's very easy to forget about them when you have another kid who's bouncing off the walls. It's hard for teachers to kind of manage all of that. I also, just in terms of kids making effective progress and sort of the tools that they use to identify, I don't know if I didn't understand the slide correctly, but I think we really need to also be using outside evaluations more effectively. Myself and other parents come in with, diagnoses from Mass General Hospital, from some very well-trained, just some really great places. And I think we need to be taking those into consideration more and not ignoring them. I think outside evaluations are a really big part of this process. And I know this is kind of a high-level overview of the process, but to live it is very different. Very different.
Yeah, and I think Kelly, made that point that, we know that it is, and as an administration, making sure that we convey to the parents that are going, I mean, it's one thing to do this type of presentation in public for the general audience of people who just want to have a better understanding of, how our district functions, how we allocate our resources and our funding. But when you talk about it like that, and, Kelly was able to reiterate, this is by far the most compelling aspect in terms of the impact on the families that are going through it. And, when we talk about the improvement of the process, we're talking about being able to make sure we're being effective for the students in terms of achieving mastery of the curriculum and stuff. But really what we're talking about is trying to make sure that we take care of the families that are requiring these services. And it's a small percentage of students and families that require those really high-level Tier 1 out-of-district placements, but there are students. there are families.
I would also say that, I mean, I understand the goal to try to be as inclusive of a process and not put IEPs on people, on children, but I would really advocate, there are some children who really do need IEPs, and if you don't have an IEP, then you're not legally entitled to services. And I think we shouldn't overlook that piece.
Yeah.
There are kids who really need those services, and by saying, oh, we're just going to integrate them doesn't guarantee them the support that they need. And I think there's a real kind of misunderstanding there.
Yeah, obviously, the goal is to strike the right balance, and at a macro level, I think, we obviously are working to make sure we do a good job. And you reiterate the micro level, and, when you're dealing with a particular student in a particular family, they could care less about the macro, and they shouldn't care about the macro. And again, also, we talk about, we're a very small district, so our ability we're going to be confronted more often with a challenge that a larger district would say, oh, yeah, we did that last week, or we did that last month, or last year. And being able to make sure that we're as responsive as we need to be in making sure those services. But I will say that the point I think that was made that I'll reiterate was that it's an ongoing process. So the initial determination might be IEP not required, but as they work through the process, if that is required, they'll get there. But I understand what you're saying about, the sooner the better.
And I really think there are some children who really, really need out of district, and I think there seems to be this idea that we can do it in district. But the reality is we've had really amazing teachers. For both my kids, we've had really great special ed teachers, but there are just some kids who need out, and they need to get out sooner than they are. And by the time they get out, a lot of damage has been done. A lot. And they are very behind. And their self-esteem is like at the bottom. And it's punishing.
Yeah.
And Amy, you're not the only one that has had a situation where multiple families tell me their stories.
Yeah, I know.
And it's something that we should pay attention to on the micro level for some of these cases.
There's,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, we have spent thousands of dollars on bringing our advocate to our IEP meetings, thousands. And I would say that I consider myself lucky to have gotten out and one of the reasons why I feel like our son got out was because my husband and I are we had the intellectual capacity to navigate the system and understand the system. And quite frankly, we have the financial resources to bring in an advocate and to help us understand our results. Even with my other son, who will only want an IEP, he's on an IEP, but we fully expect him to move off the IEP. We just had a 3-year evaluation, and there were clearly test results that were very low. And I was like, I don't know what these results mean. Like, I don't know how to interpret, what these scores mean and what these tests are about and what they're measuring. I had to bring it to someone. I had to pay them to tell me what it meant. And they said, he's dyslexic. He has a written expressing disorder, disability. I never would have been able to figure that out myself. I'm not an educator. I'm not special ed. I'm just a mom. I mean, I don't know what the people do who, don't have the resources to navigate the system. And it's not as smooth as a flow chart. It is not by any stretch of the imagination.
I totally understand that, and I think that, again, there's two things we're trying to accomplish here, and one is to that macro level to understand that there is a process. Obviously, it helps us tremendously to understand that, when the families are going through it, it's a different experience. And we acknowledge that. I mean, that makes total sense. And I think that was acknowledged by the administration, and the, constant improvement type thing is something we take seriously in all levels of what we're trying to do here in the district, but certainly it's even more important because of the stresses that the students and the families at this level are going through.
Yeah, and I would really also advocate to increase the budget for more special ed staff. I think they work really hard. I think they're really stretched really thin. They're not just, as we mentioned, servicing the kids on IEPs, but they're serving the general population as well. I really feel like we need a little bit more staff, some more people in the buildings. I'd really advocate for that. And I think we need to also become a little bit more spectrum smart in recognizing social, emotional, and behavioral issues and dealing with that. I think we're pretty good at dealing with reading disabilities or math disabilities, but I think spectrum issues and trying to manage it in the school, I really think we need to be doing a better job at that. I know the school's been working on, emotional, social stuff in school for the general population, but I think there's another segment of the population, and I think it needs some more support. So, that's all.
All right, thank you, Amy.
So, yeah, thanks.
All right, we have a financial update, Steve?
Yeah, the report's in your packet. Nothing really stands out. No surprises at this point in time. We're monitoring and moving forward, watching the budget, working through the revolving funds as well. So it's pretty mundane after the last topic. So be glad to answer any questions or provide information.
Good on that. All right. Under old business, we have the revised Vision 2020 strategic plan.
Right. In last meeting, you approved the revised plan, but we went back to the table and thought about Darrell's Tier 3 indicators of success. So went back and rewrote and added some statements that were indicative of the Tier 3 category, and really, in essence, simple terms, the collection of qualitative and quantitative data is part of the Tier 3. So we've interwoven that into our plan, and it is directional, not too explicit. You've heard me say many times that in order for strategic plans to work effectively, schools need to know where they're going, and they need the latitude and flexibility to figure out how they're going to get there, rather than being told how to get there. That's why our strategic plan, one of the many reasons why it's so effective. But there's nothing wrong with mapping out the section like indicators of success a little more explicitly, not too explicit, but explicit enough. So that's what we've done.
Comments or questions on that?
No, I want to thank you for taking, listening to my comments there and going more, like I said, I wasn't looking for intimate detail, but I think it sets the expectation that we're going to be reviewing the effectiveness, not just that we did it.
Yep.
And I think that's a great part of our way that we move forward.
Thank you.
All right. Any other old business?
No.
New business, we have an alumni field use policy document.
Yeah, this one was really interesting. I was going through some emails from the town, and this one kind of hit my attention again, and so I went down and went to the town building and talked to the treasurer, and became apparent very quickly that if we didn't have an alumni field use policy in place and approved by bond council, that we would have to go out and reapply and revote for a bond. So this was a document that needed to be done sooner than later. So I contacted our chair and said, look, I'll sit down next week and start drafting and working through it. So we're able to develop a final product. Our chair and Mike Lynn proofed the package to make sure that it was indicative of the direction that we want to go with alumni field. It's important for you to know that we can change this anytime we want. We just have to resubmit it. Darrell had caught something on the chart for charges that we would charge for for-profit entities in Littleton, non-Littleton non-profit, and then non-Littleton for-profit. And at the very end, under summer camps and clinics, we didn't have a dollar amount, so we added greater of $300 or 15% of tuition, and that was on page 71. Well, that kind of completed that. I did, when I was doing that, and I noticed it wasn't changed here, under the very last bullet, it's not a complete sentence, so I just need to add a couple of words to that to make it a complete sentence.
You probably need to add per day also under the
per day? Yep, we can certainly.
Right? Just so it's.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. Now, this, this is something, this chart, we really haven't had a lot of discussion yet. I mean, our primary concern was getting this field up and running so that we could use it for the year, and then all of a sudden we had to think about what's going to happen 4 years down the line. But we had to have something for bond council, or they wouldn't have approved it. So this was our first brush of trying to get something in place. And it serves a purpose for now, and we'll probably want to review it again in a year and make sure that, this is exactly what we want. I would say in another year, we may be looking at actually actualizing some of the chart, and we want to make sure that we're competitive, and obviously competitive enough is also important.
Yeah, I think it's important to take away a couple things. One is the really significant purpose of this exercise at this point in time was to satisfy bond council requirements. This isn't really something that I would necessarily consider exactly what we think we should or shouldn't do in terms of how we rent the field out and how we charge for it. I think we need to, as a community, really think about that more. We got the field online, maybe a third of the way through the fall season. It had significant amount of interscholastic use, but a limited amount of youth sports use and zero amount of camps, men's soccer leagues, zero, none. We're getting to the spring, it's going to be even busier. We'll have a lot more interscholastic use in terms of hours. We're going to have a lot more youth sports use in terms of hours. But we really haven't considered what do we want it to be used for camps, leagues, other things that we might want to be able to take advantage of, both in terms of, it's a benefit to the community conceivably, but also fundraising opportunity. And we can revisit it. We can think about how we best want to do it. We can even execute on something, and once we get some feedback and see the impact, we can say, well, let's revamp it again. And so this is very much a opportunity we don't have to think like we're stuck here and living with it. We can move forward.
So bond council has done the litmus test on this document. What they're still looking at, and I guess I'm going to use the word pontificating, is that clause, long-term rentals up to 3 years. And I felt it was important to give us the latitude to enter into a long-term agreement for a field. I don't see anything personally why they would object to that, because we already have in the document many times throughout it that we have the right to cancel at any time. So I just have to wait for them to sign off on that part. But I wasn't willing to concede that statement at this point in time, unless we have to.
And what is the cancellation for like if a school program needed the field?
Yeah,
you could take over there.
Yeah, there's a whole priority list in the document that actually goes through those different things. It might be something as simple as required maintenance.
Okay.
It could be many, many different things.
And so the allocation priority, is that like, can somebody get bumped from their?
Yes,
that was
according
okay.
to those
Okay.
priorities, yes.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's pretty standard. Like when we think about our gymnasiums, there is a pecking order. And it rarely happens, but when it does happen, everybody understands that varsity level competition gets first crack. Sub-varsity gets third crack. Any other school function, unit groups, and then, it goes down from there.
And it, as Mike said, is consistent with how we handle our gymnasiums. The list of priorities.
We try very hard to avoid those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's
Yes.
very rare. But the point is that when it happens, the people who are put out understand why and knew ahead of time that this could happen.
All set? Yeah, I got a couple of things here. So I want to clarify on a couple of things there. Does bond council require us to have a policy, or do they require us to have a documented process for leasing the field? Because there's a significant difference in my mind of those two pieces there, and I'm going to bring that around.
As I understand, they require a document that meets their requirements for ensuring that the bond is going to be protected.
Okay. Because the reason I do that is, and I'm going to since I tasked Kelly last time, and this one would be for our policy subcommittee here. So, so currently we have policy EBH, which talks about our ability to levy fees and use of school facilities. MASC has updated it now, it's policy KF there, which includes a little bit more. And I guess I'm leaning towards, similar to what we've done on all the other things there, we've set the direction. We're authorizing, the school committee approves the fee structure.
Correct.
The administration implements the fee structure there. I'd rather not have a policy, school committee policy about this here. I'd like to make sure our policy's updated that reflects that you're tasked to provide this, as well as you do other fee structures for us, for the busing, for the rental of the auditorium, the usage there. And this would be part of that compendium of documents.
Right. The point is, we don't expect you guys to come to us and ask for permission to re-implement. Right. As long as you're meeting the overarching policy.
Right.
It's your business.
So I'd recommend that we update from EBH to pick up the new MASC language on KF and make sure it's expansive enough to include this here. I would also like to see, it's not part of that policy there, but I would like to see as part of our policy here that you give us an annual review of all of our fee structures for annual approval. Right now, I think we informally do it on an ad hoc basis based on the topic, but we probably ought to have an overall fee structure of all of our fees
and
that we annually look at.
Right. And by extension, it would be good to have a presentation on the amount of use, the types of users, you know, whether it's private nonprofit, private for-profit, et cetera, just so we get a better idea of, because there is an impact on the school district for the use of these facilities. I think overall it's beneficial to the district to do, and I think we've struck a good balance. But I think as part of our oversight, I think we should continue to keep an eye on that.
But my request goes a little further than that, that's looking for it all at one time.
Right.
So that would include our busing fees.
That's what I mean, yeah,
The hockey fee that we've added and the other things there, so that
Fee
it also
structure
causes us to have one summary document of all of our fees. And its utilization the last year, because I think that would be helpful for us in talking to people. And it just gives us that checkpoint that we have authorized those fees appropriately there on it. So that would be my recommendation there. I just always catch on that word policy there. And once we say it's a policy, it's 2 readings. I mean, even a minor editorial change is 2 readings to the school committee and 2 votes to do it. And is that what they require or not? So let's get it the right way.
There are 2 kinds of policies.
Exactly.
There are district policies and operational policies. This is an operational policy.
Exactly, and that's what I wanted to make sure I got clarified there.
There is another piece of paper that I had to design and have Steve and I sign, and it's just a document that states that any fees collected will not be used to pay down the bond.
Yeah.
So
That
it's
was a
signed
big,
already.
right, that's a big caveat for the bond council. You good?
I had one other thing, but I'll if I come back, I'll get it.
I just wanted to segue off of this into a discussion on the MOU between the school department, PRCE, and the highway department. We've been working on it since we had a couple meetings in the summer and fall between Chuck DeCoste, Gary Austin representing PRCE, and myself, so chair to chair type thing. Our goal is to finish it by the end of the month in anticipation of the spring season, because a lot of the language in there that we're adding addresses Alumni Field, but it also addresses how we are going to track funding and the collection of funds and the expenditure of funds. And one of the things that we need is a revolving account for Alumni Field. And I think, does that require town meeting approval?
It would if we set up a separate account.
Yeah, and I think we need to do that. So, obviously, we're going to start working towards the warrant. So I want to make sure that we are thinking about that. I believe that there will also be some articles related to revolving accounts to account for. So the one I'm talking about is just for Alumni Field. But in the MOU, we're talking about being able to account for expenditures on the natural turf fields, which would be under the purview of PRCE and the Highway Department. But I'm assuming that they are going to ask for a revolving account to be started via town meeting as well. So I just want to make sure we get that on our agenda to make sure it happens in time for
And you
the
would,
town meeting.
you would prefer a separate account? I'm assuming you would. I
Yes.
just want to ask that
Yeah,
question.
yeah. I don't want it to be blended with the athletic fees account or building use or anything else that we could conceivably, if we chose to, we could fit in there. I don't want it to, I think
We
it
don't
should.
want ambiguity as to what the
Correct.
funds are for.
Correct. So, yeah. And the idea would be that, the money that would go in there would be collected from assessments to youth sports programs that make use of the facility. Any rentals we do beyond youth sports, whether it's private or public groups, profit or nonprofit, would all get funded into there. And then the expenditures would be for the maintenance and upkeep of the alumni field facility. So we can keep an eye on it and track it.
I know it's not the agenda topic tonight of the MOU there, but I just want to ensure that we don't end up with ambiguity as it relates to the shared fields that we use between Park and Rec and the schools.
Pretty explicit, but everybody will get a chance to look at it
Okay,
once
great.
the chair to chairs have,
Yep.
think it's
Draft.
appropriate, we'll get it out there. But we try to be very explicit and consistent in how those things are demarcated, both in terms of the responsibilities and who owns what. And it is significantly modified from the previous MOU, which was somewhat ambiguous, and doesn't serve the purpose anymore. Wasn't serving the purpose, frankly, as well as we wanted it to prior to having Alumni Field online, but certainly doesn't do it now because of Alumni Field.
And then, sorry to go into details, the softball field as part of the alumni field complex is different than the main.
And we talk about that.
Okay, so
Yeah,
okay.
that is.
Because that's going to require a different level of
Correct.
ongoing services.
Correct. And then, in my mind, that revolving account is for everything except the softball field. The softball field is a natural grass, natural turf, and will be taken care of by the highway department. At least, that's how we do it now.
And it will
That
be
changes over
blended
time. We'll find out.
into the Park and Rec policy.
Okay. So in this policy, now back to this,
Yeah.
that may trigger, so when this policy here does not include the use of the softball field?
That's correct. That's separate.
Okay.
Yep.
Even though it's part of the same complex?
Yeah.
The complex versus the
Correct.
individual
It
fields?
is minutia, but it is important.
Yeah.
And to be honest, we do rent out our baseball fields. I don't think we rent out our softball fields. We haven't had club softball teams that want to use it. It's really just our interscholastic and our youth softball, baseball leagues. There is no really anything beyond that, so.
That's true.
The only reason for possible confusion is if we have a summer camp that wants to use the football field and then softball is using the softball, Park and Rec is using the softball field, is there no conflict in usage?
Shouldn't be.
Well,
They can be used
or
simultaneously.
assumed usage
Right.
of.
Yes, correct.
Oh, wait, I was gonna have a tent on there.
Yeah.
There to put,
Yeah. Yeah,
drinks
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff for
yeah.
the players.
Yeah.
All that has to be pre-approved, but.
Yeah.
But anyway, that would be, just
Right.
as we talk about
Yep.
those little details
It's a
there.
good, that's a good thing to bring out, because that will have to be spelled out in the MOU, so.
Yeah.
So this evening, I'm
And
not.
to the people renting the field, that they're
Yes.
not getting
Right.
use of the softball field.
Right,
Right,
right. Yeah.
unless they ask for it.
Right.
They have to ask.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
We could accommodate them, right, but it can't be an assumed thing, because it would be separate. It would be a separate charge and a separate, yeah.
Right. So I'm not asking for a vote this evening. There's no sense in doing a vote until I have the blessing of bond council.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to go back and change it and have another vote, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, any other new business?
Nope.
Okay. We're at the second spot for interested citizens, but I think we covered it. Excuse me, subcommittee reports, PMBC.
We got snowed out last night.
Yeah, you guys got saw not too long ago, right?
Yeah, well, when they closed town hall, they
Yeah.
canceled the meeting,
Push it
so
out.
we're meeting on Monday there. I think warrant and the FY19 capital plan will be the discussion topics.
Budget Subcommittee, so we have a joint meeting with the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen this coming Tuesday, the 13th. I think that's a 7 o'clock start. I think FinCom starts at 7 o'clock. I sent a memo to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee earlier today. There had been a request for some clarification on several of the budget items, specifically how we're determining the amount required to support the reduction of tuition for full-day kindergarten. There was some question on the new busing contract and some questions on staff turnover. So I sent that to them today. They are also asking for an update on the revolving account balances and actual and projected. And Steve will have that ready, and we'll get that over to them tomorrow. You guys will see a copy of it too when that goes out. And then, I assume that the discussion on, I also was conveyed to the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom that what we agreed to was the level service number that we expect to see put into the model, and they understood that and acquiesced to that, so that's good. I think the bulk of the discussion on Tuesday will be, now that we have all the information from all the town departments, including the school department, in the model for the level service and the mission budget, along with the current revenue projections, there is a deficit. So the bulk of the discussion, I assume, will revolve around what our strategies are as a town for closing that deficit. It'll be based on the revenue projections, it'll be based on our revolving account, how much do we think we want to spend out of those, and there's also some strategies on the town side regarding reserves and revolving accounts that I would think are open to discussion as well. So, all right, any questions or thoughts on that?
Just a comment, we've had this discussion before, but I think it's worth bringing it up again. The purpose of the revolving accounts has to be adhered to if we're going to utilize them as revenue. So you can't take funds from Tiger's Den and apply them to high school staffing. So there are explicit laws and procedures. It's not just a sum of money that can be put wherever you want. I know everybody around this table knows that, but I think it was worth mentioning again.
All right, very good. All right, Policy Subcommittee?
Nothing.
You got a task now, so.
I know I have. Oh, believe me, I have other. Do
we have any other business? We will require a short executive session for the purposes of contract negotiation strategy discussion.
Just one thing before, if you wouldn't mind, before we go in. I'm going to be at a conference next week, and Dr. Harrington will be in charge of the day-to-day operations of the district. Anything that arises to a level of severity will still come directly to me via Dr. Harrington. So I'll still be actively involved. I just won't be here to deal with the day-to-day.
When you guys do that, is there like a formal handing off of responsibility, like a scepter gets passed or something, and then passed back when you get back?
I could make one up. No, it's just an email that officially designates. I can temporarily designate authority.
No, Kelly pulls up to the high school, goes once around with squealing tires, lets you know he's out of there. That signals you're in charge.
That's the code.
Relay team. I'll make a motion to adjourn to executive session with no intent to return to open session for the purpose of contract strategy negotiations with the LEA.
Yep.
Second.
All right, this is a roll call vote. Matt?
Aye.
Jen?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Aye. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.